Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Built to Last. Today, we dive into the fall of Jericho, a masterclass in the power of divine strategy, as well as the aftermath to this victory. For a time, I was in the book of Joshua, wherein we find the account of the fall of Jericho. And reading it that time around, God so beautifully highlighted what a masterclass it is in the power of divine strategy. But first, some context. The book of Joshua begins with God commissioning Joshua as Israel's leader after the death of Moses. The Lord commands him in Joshua 1 verse 6, "Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land I swore to their fathers to give them." Joshua then assumes command, and as his first order of business, he commands Israel to prepare all they have to cross the Jordan, and secretly sends 2 spies to go view the land, especially Jericho. Verbatim, especially Jericho. Upon entering Jericho, the 2 spies go to the house of Rahab, a prostitute. This is in fact brilliant and incredibly strategic. These foreign men entering the city to see a prostitute is a brilliant guise veiled in biology, though their presence did not go unnoticed. Rahab willingly hid the spies and lied to the authorities when the king of Jericho sent to her, instructing that she let the men out. Now Rahab lived in the wall of the city. Walls were built to fortify and protect a city, so I think you might agree that to live in the wall is to live in the most vulnerable position in the event of an attack. This tells us that she must have been discarded or disregarded in her city. She must have been poor or in need, because why else was she a prostitute? And her list of dependents, those she asked to be saved along with her, was long. It's clear that she was ready to sell out to survive, and in her line of work, I can imagine that may have been something she was used to. To continue, in Joshua 6, the Lord tells Joshua that he has given Jericho into Israel's hand, and details how they are to march around the city once for 6 days and 7 times on the 7th day, with the trumpets blowing continually and the men of war silent. That is, of course, until the long blast of the ram's horn on the 7th day, when they are commanded to shout, for the city is theirs. The command to remain silent initially made sense to me for the obvious reason that they were a lot. A sea of men, I can imagine. If they were to speak on the first 6 days, or even the first 6 rotations on the 7th day, they would have been loud and perhaps distracted, leaving themselves vulnerable, potentially leaving room for Jericho to attack first. But that couldn't have been it. The trumpets had already given them away, and as Rahab had said, in Joshua 2 verse 9, the fear of Israel had already fallen upon the inhabitants of Jericho. They melt away before you, she said. So Jericho had already caught wind of Israel and the coming siege. A far less obvious, though profound, reason why they may have been instructed to march in silence was to keep all doubt, fear, and every word contrary to what the Lord had spoken silent, leaving no room for the seeds of the enemy to spread amongst the men of war. 'Cause yes, this plan at first glance seems anything but strategic, or even just effective. It seems ridiculous and highly unlikely that they will conquer a city by marching around it silently. But this was God's divine plan. The Lord is not only brilliant, but a good father who knows his children's limitations as humans. God, in his divine plan and mercy, opposed and silenced the instinct to doubt, so that he could do the supernatural, leaving room for only the supernatural to thrive. But also, if on every silent rotation by the men of war, the trumpets are the only sound, and these trumpets go before the ark of the Lord, which represents and is tantamount to the presence of God. It's really like on all those turns the Lord himself and the weight of his presence was doing the work, the heavy lifting in weakening the wall of Jericho. Because it doesn't make sense to me that they will walk around the wall unless they are weakening it. So if God's presence encompasses this wall day after day with all of Israel silent, it's like God is saying, let me do this. Let me do my thing first, and then you can do your little thing and shout. So by the end of the 7 days, the Lord has dealt the majority of the blow to the wall of Jericho, and their shout merely completed the final blow. Yet another example of why God should come first, why we should ask that he go before us in everything, and why there should be less of us and more of him. Not only was Jericho conquered through divine strategy, it was devoted to God as the first. The first belongs to the Lord. The firstborn, as seen in Exodus 13 verse 2, and the first fruits, Deuteronomy 26 verse 1 to 4. Jericho was the first city Israel took possession of after crossing the Jordan. It was a kind of first fruit before the Lord, with all things, men, women, young, old, oxen, sheep, donkeys, devoted to destruction, except the silver and gold, and every vessel of bronze and iron, which would enter the Lord's treasury. Israel was to take no spoils from this first victory. As the first, it was burned with fire and offered up to the Lord. But as we read on in Joshua chapter 7, we discover that a man named Achan had done the unforgivable and taken for himself some of the devoted things. Achan's sin ultimately led to Israel's defeat against Ai. And in Joshua 7 verse 10 to 26, he is found out and dealt with in a way that reads like a drama. Okay, go read it. Thereafter, round 2 cracks off against Ai, and it's Israel for the win. But this time the Lord commands Joshua that they only devote the inhabitants of Ai to destruction, and the livestock and spoil they take for themselves. Only then can they take the spoil for themselves. It is not lost on me that though they may have desired the spoil of the first win against Jericho, it belonged to the Lord. And once they had given to God what was his, they could then receive their portion. If Achan had only known to wait a little longer for what was his God-ordained portion, perhaps he wouldn't have taken of the devoted things. Unfortunately, it is all too easy to look at Achan and think I wouldn't have done that. To look at him and cast judgment on a man who didn't exercise self-control and patience for a little while longer. Many times have I found myself being an Achan of sorts in my own adult life. It's a lot harder to remain steadfast in discipline, patience, and obedience when you don't know when your portion will finally come. Fortunately, our God is a master of strategy in all things, not just war. Unfortunately, strategy takes time, precision, patience, all the things that are harder to do when it's been, quote, long enough. I can imagine marching around Jericho took a lot out of the men of war, because Jericho, unlike Ai, wasn't described as only having a few people. It was big. Marching around it must have been tiring, even though victory was near. We get tired and impatient, but this is a gentle reminder to not be Achan even then, and rather wait in submission. Masterful strategy begets patience. Till next time, this has been built to last.